Hey, you guys, welcome to this week's edition of the Pantry Chat Food for Thought. This week, we're going to be talking about emergency preparedness. You know, this is just a topic that is so important as we see over and over again emergencies hitting and people not being prepared. And it's easy to kind of point our finger and laugh at somebody else and say, or maybe not even laugh, but just like, gosh, you'd think that they would have been prepared for that natural disaster because it happens regularly in that area. But are we actually as prepared as we should be? So today we're going to be diving into some of the basics of emergency preparedness. And for today, I've invited Glinda from Layman's to join us. Now, a lot of you guys know Layman's is a off-grid store. It is an amazing place. It's a lot of fun. It's family owned and operated since 1955. Layman's goal is to help you live a better, simpler life. City or country, rural or urban, they can help you build a better future and one that values personal connections, integrity, and tradition. Sounds pretty aligned with all of our goals here over at Homesteading Family. You'll find their retail store in the heart of Ohio's Amish country in the city of Kidron, Ohio. This is where their story began. For those of us who can't visit their storefront, their print catalog and online store give you access to hundreds of practical goods from planting supplies and preserving supplies to off-grid living. So they've really been working on their off-grid living game for a long time. And so I thought, hey, who better than to talk to Glinda from Layman. So we're going to be bringing her on in a moment, but I want to say thank you for today's sponsor, which we thought would be appropriate to be Layman, since they are a sponsor of Homesteading Family. So we thought, hey, why not throw them on this episode? And I've got to tell you guys, you've heard me say it before, I have personally been buying supplies from Layman's for almost 2 decades now. I love everything about them. I have not yet gotten to go to their store in person, but everything that I've purchased is in incredible quality. So I'm sure we'll be talking about more of their products today in this episode, but just know that if you're looking for any off-grid solutions, non-electric solutions, or just solutions for a simpler life, go check them out. We'll have links for you in the show notes. All right, without further ado, let's jump in and say hi to Glinda. Hey, Glinda, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Carolyn.
So I did a little bit of an introduction to Layman's, kind of the official introduction, but just in your own terms, tell us a little bit about Layman's and what it is that they offer. What makes Layman so special, I guess, is really what I want to ask.
I'm probably a little bit biased because Layman's was founded by my father, Jay Layman, in 1955, which if you do the math, that makes this our 70th anniversary. Hard to believe. Here in Northeast Ohio, Kidron, Ohio, where we're located about an hour south of Cleveland, we're kind of in the heart of Amish country. And my father, who was not Amish, but he greatly respected their way of life. Many of your listeners probably know they live without electricity. And Dad was concerned that if they didn't have the products they needed to maintain that way of life, their agrarian lifestyle would be lost. And so keep in mind, in 1955, lots of small businesses were selling oil lamps and water pumps and wood cook stoves. The difference for him was that he was going to continue selling those no matter what happened around him. So in the 50s and the 60s, it wasn't unusual. Every small town in rural America was selling these products, but in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and of course in 2025, it was unusual to have those products and all the pieces, parts, and perhaps more importantly, the knowledgeable people on staff who knew how to make sausage and homemade ice cream and sauerkraut and, canned food and the difference between a water bath and a pressure canner. Because those of us in our world kind of know about those things. But if you think about, the greater, commercialized world, a lot of that generational knowledge has been lost. And I'd like to think it's people like in your channel and what we do here at Layman's are helping to keep that legacy knowledge alive, which might not have as much value if there weren't the products there to support that lifestyle.
I just love that. And, for my own walk, I remember seeing that very first Layman's catalog way back when I was just starting to think about some of these things. And I felt like, I don't know, a combination of going to Disneyland and like a museum or something. Like I just felt like I had arrived, and you guys were obviously my type of people, because anybody who's selling, butter churns and the gas lamps, the oil lamps, but not just the cheap ones that you can still get occasionally at a hardware store that kind of work and maybe give you a little bit of light, but like the real ones that you can live with. I was like, okay, these are definitely my people. And it was such an excitement for me, but it really drove me to learn so much, because it was eye-opening just to look through the catalog. I was like, oh, I didn't even know you could do this. I didn't know you could do these things. Or that, at that point, I didn't even know that there were still wood-burning cook stoves being made. I thought that was a historical thing. Here I was smack in the middle of Southern California. And, within about 2 years, I had one and was cooking on it and learning how to do really, amazing desserts. Like, I remember doing a pumpkin pie cheesecake
Yum.
on the wood cook stove. And I was like, I had the sense that I had arrived finally at my proper destination, like where I actually belonged in history. And, but, it was all, I think, sparked by seeing what was possible just by flipping through the catalog. I haven't even gotten to go to the store. And so I love how your dad started, to serve the Amish. And yet it's kind of gone both ways, in that now he's reintroducing, and you guys are reintroducing these heirloom skills back to the rest of us. It's just amazing how that's worked out so well.
Yeah, and my father, who never even graduated from high school, just had so many ideas. He had a real can-do spirit, much like the Amish. And the catalog came out in the late 70s. And I think looking back, that timing was very fortuitous, because that was the time when prepared foods and frozen TV dinners and women entering the workforce, and that was the loss of some of that generational knowledge. Because honestly, today, and even yesterday's generation, if your mom didn't, your grandma didn't, your great-grandma or grandpa didn't, who is teaching that knowledge? And so these are my words, not his, but what he wanted to do is preserve the past for future generations. He thought people should know that milk comes from goats and chickens, and eggs come from chickens, and milk comes from goats, and how to churn butter and fix a wagon wheel and take care of yourselves. Someone told me once that modern man could be standing next to a cow in a field and starve to death. And it shouldn't be that way. People should know how to support themselves. And so I think that the catalog really helped people start their journey to a simpler life, which is what we're all about now. And we encourage people to take a small step. Maybe you want to eat a little healthier, or you don't want to get your kids off screen time, or you don't have to live totally off grid. Maybe that is your desire, but just to take some of those small steps. And we certainly have seen this over the past couple of years with the pandemic and people being stuck at home, just learning how to bake sourdough bread, and the joy of cooking and creating with their own hands, and nourishing their family with products that they grow. There's a real joy in that. And I'm sure you get that. You've been doing that for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. Reconnecting with the simpler things in life has a lot of benefits to it. And, I always say simpler things of life, and it makes me want to chuckle, because a lot of times simpler is not easier, but we've been chasing after convenience for so long that I think we've actually, shut ourselves out of the joys of just simple labor, of working with our hands, of seeing the results of our hand, the health of those home cooked meals, and of working with the people that we love. And so it's like these things, they may not be easier, but they are simpler, and they just fulfill us in a way that all the convenience foods, all the vacations, all these other things just can never do.
Yeah, who said
So
we
I love
needed a full meal in 3 minutes, right?
it.
Who said
Exactly.
that's what we deserve? So, and we tell people new to this, it's not easier and it's not faster. I mean,
Yeah.
the easiest, fastest thing is to go through a drive-through.
Right.
But it's satisfying, it's understandable, it's healthier in the long run. It's probably a lot cheaper if you invest in quality products and you grow your own food. And really, food is what fuels our body. And so if we're putting poor fuel into our body, what we hear from people too is that they're sick and tired of feeling sick and tired. And that's because the fuel is not what they need for their bodies. So
Absolutely. Oh, that's great. Well, today we are really talking about emergency preparedness
mhm.
inside the Homestead Kitchen membership. We're right now doing a preparedness challenge all together. So, as a big group, there's several thousand of us that are checking our emergency supplies, making sure that we have everything put together. But I wanted to talk about it here on the podcast because I think this is something that's just so important, and we're seeing I don't even know if I want to call it a rise in natural disasters or man-made disasters, but it's definitely feeling like the world's a little unstable. What I definitely feel like we're seeing a rise of, though, is people that are unprepared to handle it. And in some cases, these things sneak up on us, obviously, and we're not prepared for it. But having some basic preparedness pieces in place really can reduce the stress of some of these
Mhm.
situations that we're finding ourselves in across the United States and the world. And it's just something that's really good basic household management is having something set aside for a rainy day, whether that's money or some food or all the basics that you need. And so today we really are diving into the basics that we should have on hand or at least have considered and have some plans or solutions for in our head before we run into a crisis. And again, those don't tend to announce themselves beforehand. They don't give you like 2 weeks notice that you're about to be in an emergency situation. So
Right.
it's one of these things we really need to take some time when it's not an emergency and get ourselves, settled, set up well for this situation. Some of the challenges with that is that, we're busy. Life's humming along just fine. Maybe there's not a lot of money in the budget to set aside things for buying some extra supplies. But let me tell you, when you actually hit that disaster, you will be so thankful that you did. I know up here in North Idaho, where we're at, we are in the middle of nowhere. And we have gotten multiple snowstorms where the plows don't make it to us for days on end because we're really tucked back here. And when you're prepared for everything that you need, you have all your needs, it becomes a family holiday. Like we're
Mhm.
out having fun and enjoying ourselves because, we didn't need anything we had to go to town for anyway. So that's okay. We just, have fun. And so when you're prepared for things, it really turns that situation around and lets you look at it from a very fresh point of view. So, Glinda, let's jump right into what are some of the things that we need to be prepared for in order to be able to face emergencies well?
The first thing people need to think of is be prepared, not scared. Like
Mm,
you alluded to that sense of peace of mind. And nobody wants their car to run out of gas. Nobody wants their bank account to be empty or their fridge to be empty. And so what we're selling, what we're promoting is peace of mind. Be prepared, not scared. Now, you and I know there's a big difference. You mentioned your very well between a 3-hour power outage, a 3-day, and a 3-week. So you know where you are. If you're in a very rural area, think of 3 weeks or think of 3 days or 3 hours. Most of us can get through 3 hours without too much trouble. 3 days, particularly if you have the very young or the very old or somebody is ill. 4 categories to keep in mind: heat, food, light, and water.
mm,
In most cases, you can live for a little while without heat and light, but water, particularly, and food are most important. So, one of our primary categories is wood heating and cooking stove. To be truly prepared, having a wood heating stove. Now, this is not something that you plug in at the last minute. This is something that you have installed, that you know how to use. Most of your listeners probably know it needs a chimney, it needs hearth clearance. We have installers, we have all the experts on staff, we sell them all over the country. And if you live in a woods, you have free firewood. So again, it's not fast, not easy, but it will save you money. It's a wonderful dry heat. The wood cook stoves, you cook in them and you can cook on them. So if you have a power outage, you're warming your house, you can, dry your clothes, put them on a drying rack next to the stove. The dog is sleeping in front of it. Even the kids can sleep in front of it. So a wood cook stove, even as backup, is a wonderful addition. That is something more long-term that you would use year round. But we see people in a lot of the colder states that use it as a secondary heat. You have a regular furnace, but not only does it knock a lot off your electric bill, it's a different kind of heat. It's a very warm, dry heat. And if you have access to firewood, now we do tell people, perhaps if it's somebody elderly, they have no desire to schlep firewood, stack firewood, chop firewood, that's probably not the best option for you. But a wood heating or cooking stove is really the best thing for heating. Light is a particularly easy one because you can get an oil lamp, an Aladdin lamp. We call them table lamps because they're not meant to be portable, but with the mantle technology, which came around around the 1920s and really changed lives for people because it was bright as a 75-watt light bulb, which meant you could now mend your quilt, mend your tools, read your Bible. Think this is the 1920s. Previously to that, you had to go to bed when it was dark and get up when it was light. So this was really life-changing because you had enough light inside to do things. We also have lanterns. Sometimes they're called hurricane lanterns because the glass surrounds the wick, which you could carry to the barn. They're meant to be portable. You could carry camping. Now, it's a much, not nearly as bright of light. I mean, you can see with it. You could probably play a board game, but it's not as bright. Now, an Aladdin lamp will also put out quite a bit of heat. So if you were in a smaller bedroom and you had it on the table, you could sleep in that room and you would be surprised how much heat that puts out. We also have things like hand crank flashlights. I love candles for ambience. I would not recommend them, particularly if you have pets and children. They can get knocked over. There's just kind of a danger element there. I think candle is lovely for a romantic dinner, but I would not suggest them for a power outage. The other thing about both the lanterns and the lamps is they're very attractive. You can have them setting there, ready to go. Again, I would practice first, make sure how to use them, make sure you have the lamp oil and the fuel. It's not hard. The fuel is stored in the base. You just crank up the wick and light it, but don't wait. That's the whole point of be prepared, not scared. Make it a fun activity. Hey kids, today we're all going to make sure that we know how to light this. We know that this one we walk around with. This one is a table lamp. We don't walk around with it. So now you've got your heat and then you've got your light. Food, having a well-stocked pantry, whether you can it yourself or you buy canned food. You can also get freeze-dried food, which has a very long shelf life, and pickling, fermenting. There's an awful lot of ways to preserve food. Honey is one of the foods that virtually never expires. And there are some other shelf-stable foods that you can have on hand. We do recommend if you buy a lot of canned food, Layman sells canned meat, which is wonderful. We have people buy it by the cases, beef, turkey, all of that. Make sure you have a can opener. How frustrating to have all this canned meat and not have a can opener.
One that doesn't require electricity.
Exactly.
Right.
A can opener like this. And then again, think of the people in your household. If you have somebody who has trouble chewing, make sure you have some of those foods that don't have all beef jerky there. That's not going to work for them. So it's really a personalized, individualized plan. And we often think of 3 to 5 days. Is it a reasonable amount to have food for people? And you'll have to encourage people not to be picky. You may have to have the same thing for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But if you have chickens and you have a wood cook stove, you're having eggs for breakfast. That's just fine and dandy. So anything that doesn't need to be refrigerated, unless you have a gas refrigerator, which we also sell, which doesn't take electricity, which the Amish use. Then you've got refrigeration. Or if it's cold enough outside, of course, you could keep meat and milk and things like that on the front porch. Water, the most important thing. The most intense thing would be to install a water pump. Again, that's a lifestyle kind of choice that you have to think ahead of time. You have to have the right permitting, that kind of stuff, which basically means you don't have an electric pump pumping water to the house. You have a well you're getting your own water from the ground. You can also use a tabletop filter where you can get snow, creek water. People think that kind of water is pristine and clean. It's really not. For one thing, it comes down through the air. Creek water may have animal carcasses, feces, something up water, and it can make you really sick. But what it does is it drips through these charcoal filters and becomes very drinkable. So you could have a large it's like a big bucket where it just drips through and you have your drinking water. You could also, if you have the wood cook stove, boil water on the stove. We also have some very small ones. Campers also use them, life straw, where it's basically like a travel cup, but you can pour coffee in it and it comes out water. That's
Oh,
how
wow.
strong those are. But the recommendation is a gallon of water per person. So like a large family like yours, that's a lot of water per
Mhm.
person. So those are the basic things: heat, food, light, water. Now, if you have children, it can be scary when there's a power outage, particularly if it's dark and the wind is blowing or there's a thunderstorm. I recommend having some things tucked away, a set of dominoes, maybe a stuffed animal, a couple blankets and pillows. Maybe, like you said, it's a holiday. Maybe you make a tent over the dining room table. I mean, it doesn't have to be scary or panicky. And you probably know children often take their clues from us. And so it's a cozy time. We're all warm. We're all safe. We're all loved. And then maybe some favorite treats, maybe some homemade granola bars, or again, with the wood cook stove, maybe you make popcorn. Maybe you make a pot of soup or stew. And then the last thing that we certainly don't sell, but if there are important medications, always make sure that, if you've got 2 pills left and grandma's not going to make it without 10, always make sure that you've got those extra medications. And then finally, if there is no electricity, nobody's going to have technology. Write down on a piece of paper important information, whether
Yes.
it's the phone number of your brother-in-law or the address of your brother-in-law who lives far away, or each individual person is going to have those things that they have to think about, medicine, specific dietary requirements, things that they have to write down, things like that. But I recommend the heat, food, light, water. And when you think of it that way, it's manageable. You've got
Yes.
4 categories. And if you think of 3 to 5 days, the people in my family, what specific needs do they have? I think it becomes less overwhelming.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, and that's a lot of information right there. I think you know, to our brains, we hear that information. We think, okay, heat, yes, we need to stay warm so we don't freeze, right?
Mhm.
We think food, we don't want to be hungry. Obviously, water, we need hydration. Sometimes light gets overlooked as maybe not essential to survival, right? But let me tell you, in an emergency situation, light is so essential. One, for psychological benefits,
Mhm.
we need that because you know what? In a rough situation, um, you don't want to be sitting there in the dark and not able to know what's going on when you're hearing crashing, when you're hearing, whatever the circumstance is,
Right.
you need to be able to have that light. But from that psychological point of view, especially if you have children, you need to have some light so that people can see around. And then, of course, you have the basics of light, like, in North Idaho in the middle of winter, we get way more hours of dark than we do of light. We're down in the darkest time of the year, we're down to only 8 hours of light. That means a vast majority of our day is in darkness. So if you want to accomplish anything, you want to be able to actually heat up your food, wash your dishes, anything like that, you do need that light on hand, and you need light that is not going to have batteries that are not going to be working the moment that you actually need them. And that's a challenge. It's like we all have that flashlight that's sitting around with dead D-size batteries that we're like, do they even make these? Like, can we even get these things anymore? Does anybody even sell these? That's not going to do you any good. So you need something that is always available for you. And that's one of the things that I just love about something like the lanterns and the
Mhm.
lamps, the oil lamps, is that it's not going to have been forgotten to be charged. You're not going to have lost the cord. You're not, there's none of these pieces that need to be done prerequisitely to actually using it. But I do want to echo what Glinda's saying here. Make sure you practice,
Mhm.
especially with these lamps. I know the first time I used an Aladdin lamp, I think I burned through 3 mantles before I
Mhm.
figured it out. And so, it does have some skill, but you'll be amazed at how bright those things actually are. So even if the lamp is the backup to the backup, you want to make sure you have that on hand.
Right. And waterproof matches is another thing that I would suggest. Those are easily available. One thing about light, too, there can be, I totally agree with the psychological, especially if you're in an area where there's not any ambient light, it can be pitch dark. You
Yeah.
can't see your hand in front of your face. And we're not used to that. It can be a safety issue too. What if you have to go in the basement and get something? You could
Yeah.
trip, excuse me, fall down the stairs. And so light is very important for psychology and for safety. Now, we do sell a hand cranked radio,
Mm.
which depending on where you are, if something happens and there's no power, it can be very disconcerting to not know why. Has something happened nationally? Has something happened locally? Was it an act of God, of Mother Nature? And if your car won't start and you have no cell service and you have no internet, for peace of mind, it is nice to have that hand cranked radio that maybe you can catch a piece of news or to see what happened. I would suggest too is checking your pantry or wherever your stuff is stored at least once a year, if not twice. Many canned goods have a shelf life of a year or two, but if you go back 7 years later, you may not be happy with what you found. So maybe depending on your and your spouse's birthdays are, if they're 6 months apart, those could be the dates that you have a reminder to go and check, or maybe the first day of summer and the first day of winter. You go and check. And then keep in mind, too, there's a big difference between a power outage in the middle of summer and the power outage in the middle of winter, because you're not going to have to worry about heat. Most people can stay relatively cool. We've had people ask us when there's power outage, how do I iron my clothes? And we very kindly say, that's the least of your worries when there's a power outage. You don't really have to worry about things like that. You need to worry about being safe and warm and hydrated. And so we do sell, if people want like a bug out bag, if you've ever heard of that, which is basically a backpack, that's a whole different scenario. Like if you have to leave for maybe like an earthquake where you have to leave. What I'm talking about more is if you're safe, you're sheltering in place, you've got little ones you need to take care of, and you just want to make sure you're secure. I think that's more of a reasonable situation, like a blizzard, a snowstorm, a power outage. That's the kind of thing that we just tell people, if you're prepared, there's no need to be scared.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that you bring the seasonality into it too, because Josh and I have had the honor of getting to live through multiple 3-week power outages in different areas of the country and in different seasons. One of them was in the middle of Southern California in fire season, and the power was out for 3 weeks in the middle of summer. And so, at that moment, what our electrical concerns are is keeping the food in the freezer and the refrigerator good, because we have no natural backup for that in the middle of the summertime. It's a very different scenario. Here in North Idaho, in the middle of winter, we just open the freezers and just like, that's okay. It's not a big deal. It's so cold outside anyways, And so you have that scenario. In the middle of winter, though, you have a whole different scenario where you may literally need to be working to keep your family warm, and to add that heat in. And that might actually be a health, a danger, a real emergency, is to keep people warm. I know we saw that in the ice storms in Texas not too many years ago, where people were not able to stay warm and they were literally freezing to death in their homes because they didn't have the backup systems to stay warm in. And so thinking through the different seasons and not just assuming that an emergency will come in one given season is always an important thing to do.
We do notice that people in certain geographic areas, like you mentioned, rural Idaho, Vermont, New Hampshire, Ohio, we're kind of used to it. We get snowstorms, we get blizzards, we get power outages. And then like Texas, the ice storm, that was very unusual. They don't have the road crews, they don't have the salt, they don't have equipment. And those are the people that our heart just breaks for them, because they need to prepare maybe once a lifetime. And so at the very least, if you had a lantern, you had a life straw, you had a hand cranked radio, and you had a small stash of dehydrated food. I mean, that's a pretty low budget kind of thing that at least you're not without anything. If you live someplace, my brother lives in Vermont, and the ice storm could hit through and he'd be out of power for weeks, but he's got the wood stove, and he's all in because of where he lives. And so again, there's kind of a gradient in preparedness. If you, like you said, you've had the honor of living without electricity for weeks at a time, so you're all in. Somebody else, and then there's a difference too if you live in a high rise in New York City.
Oh,
You
yeah.
are completely dependent on others. I mean, your elevator is not going to work. You're surrounded by people that don't have what they need. That is a whole nother scenario too, than being in a rural area where you're only responsible for your immediate family and you know what you have. So it really is an individualized plan, but putting some thought into it long before there's a disaster, before you pick the prettiest, calmest day and go through your plan and maybe, if you live in an area where there's neighbors, maybe your neighbor has a cow but you have chickens,
Right.
or that bartering, that trading. That's what the Amish do all the time. they
Yeah.
they tra- and they have this community. You probably heard that when someone's barn comes down, they have a barn raising and all the men get together and they put that barn back up like in 2 days, and the women come and bring the food. They're very geographically closely community oriented, and we could learn a lot from them. I feel like, I guess it's because people move a lot, but we've lost a lot of that connection with our neighbors that they still have.
Oh, I love that. That's a great word there. I want to touch on something else that you said, because it's something that we're really taking some time and working on in the Emergency Preparedness Challenge inside the Homestead Kitchen membership right now. And that is getting a physical something with your information on
Mhm.
it. And right now in our challenge that we're doing, we're actually putting together a full binder, and we have all
Mhm.
sorts of worksheets that people are filling out that, like, you need all this basic information. But it's something that's really true, and it's really extra true, I believe, if you live on a homestead and you have anything that needs to be cared for, because there are a lot of emergencies where you actually end up being the one who has to leave, right? Think of,
Mhm.
a family member has a medical emergency and you need to go with them to the hospital. um, hopefully you don't have a medical emergency and need to go to the hospital. Something happens somewhere and you have to leave unexpectedly. Having that information all written down, including things like feeding schedules, garden care schedules, what are the animals' veterinarian needs in case an animal has a problem and you're not reachable?
Mhm.
Who all's in the household in case there's a disaster and they're trying to make sure that, we can identify everybody who should be here. And so making sure that you have a central location, you have this physical information written down. It's great to have a digital copy of it too, in case you're out and about and you need that information. We love the digital copy, but don't forsake good old paper,
Mhm.
and having something at your fingertips so that you can grab it if, like you said, sometimes the communications go down, sometimes the devices go down. If you're not set up with a generator or some way to charge your devices, battery backups, those are only going to last for a certain amount of time before they don't have any charge anymore. So just make sure we're thinking paper as well as those digital resources, and having all your information gathered into one location so that it's easily findable when you're in that state. An emergency is not usually a naturally calm moment.
Right.
It's not when you want to be digging through your files trying to find that identification or that record of somebody's, even veterinary care or medical care, whatever it is. You want to have everything at your fingertips right now so that you can encourage calm in a situation that's already chaotic, not the other way around. You don't want the situation to be, sending you into a bigger panic while you're trying to solve it.
Right, and think of, maybe you're the caregiver for grandma or an aunt, and you're the one who always gives her medication. Have a list of that, or you're the one that checks on her twice a day, or yeah, just think of the people in your circle that you're connected with. That if you were out of that circle, who would need to connect with them? One thing too to think about if there's a power outage is the livestock. Make sure that their water doesn't freeze. There's a number of ways to do that. The easiest one, if it's not too cold, is to put the water in the sun. The
Oh,
next one is movement, to keep the water moving somehow. There's all kinds of things out there to do that. But I've heard of people before that were heartbroken, that were warm and cozy in their house and forgot that their animals' water froze. They had food and they had warmth, but their water froze. And so now that would be a longer term cold
mhm.
kind of thing. But think of your livestock too. Again, something that should be thought of ahead of time. If you live in that cold climate, you're
Right.
probably accustomed to that, because it does get cold. But yeah, it's a lot of responsibility, but you will sleep better at night, pre-disaster, knowing that you are prepared.
Definitely. And that's something that's just so good, is just that encouragement of calm. We keep saying that, right? What was the
Mhm.
saying that you had?
Be
What
prepared, not scared.
There you go. Be prepared, not scared. And, we could add to that probably a whole list of sayings. I think the one that comes to mind right now is that the prepared are usually spared, right?
Mm,
And
mhm,
in some ways, I think it's just because we move through an event gracefully. When we're prepared, we have everything we need for it. And so it doesn't strike us as traumatic of an event. And that's just always a good place to be existing, as far as we have the power to do. Obviously, there are events, there are emergencies that happen that are completely outside of our control, and there's no way that we could have prepared for that. These fires that we've seen in Southern California, obviously, their emergency supplies that are on their shelf are probably not helping them in that situation if there's a fire imminently coming at you. In that case, you might be interested in something like the go bag and making sure
mhm,
that you have your supplies ready to grab and walk out the door. But, there are many, many things in life that we can prepare for. And sometimes they're not even big natural disasters. Sometimes there's something as simple as, somebody gets sick. It's a small power outage locally. I know that is what has happened in our area, is that one of those 10-day power outages we had, it was a wind event. And we didn't actually have any negative effects from the wind, except that it took out so many power lines in our area. And we're on such a we're so rural that we were way down. We were last on their priority list to come
wow.
fix it. And so it took them that long to actually fix our power. So we didn't have any problems from the wind directly. We just had no power for about 10 days.
Mhm,
And, so it's not always some big traumatic event, but being prepared for it just really, really reduces the stress in pretty much every scenario where we've had major power outages around us. Within about 24 to 48 hours, we start hearing reports that all the generators in the area have been sold out.
mhm.
Always happens, right? Because it's like, oh, I think I should go get that generator. Otherwise, we're going to lose all the meat that's in the freezer. And it's like, don't put yourself in that scenario where now you're driving. We had a family member who had to drive for 5 hours to get outside of a disaster zone to get a generator just to be able to come back in and keep their meat from going bad in their freezer. So there's just no reason to do that when you could just be prepared ahead of time.
Right. Now we do have, this is what the Amish do. We do have the gas refrigerators and the kerosene freezers, and they'll share them.
Oh, yeah. I
Because
love
they never have electricity. But you could potentially, if there were a number of people living in a close area and they had
that.
regular power outages, then everyone throws everything in the freezer. But yeah, there's a difference between having to leave an area like the LA fires. Hopefully, you can go to a family member, because
Yes.
that's a more contained area where you have to leave, as opposed to sheltering in place. Those are the different scenarios there. So
Yeah.
we just encourage. Another one I thought of is, when you prepare, you can care for others that you
Yes.
need to take care of. And my children are grown now, but I know you've got a house full, and I feel like a lot of people are caring for um, the elderly and the younger people. And then two, one thing, if you are like my husband and I, if something would happen and we do have those resources, maybe there's somebody else that we could help, and so maybe we could make that known too. Like in our neighborhood, there's an elderly couple across the street, and we've already told them before, call us, or just walk over or something. We have the resources if there's a power outage. And so that's some ways that we can help neighbors too, if you have things that they don't, that you can help with.
Yeah, I think that's so good. And you touched on this a little bit before about the Amish and the community building that they have built
Mhm.
around their local. A lot of times we find that our community, I think, is very spread out. Maybe we're not going to church in the area that's directly around us. Maybe we're driving a little ways and, going to church with people who come from all different areas. Maybe who we consider our friends, we're often visiting with in more of a digital way instead of a local way. And so building that local network is so important, and especially important around your neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
No, we don't have very many neighbors where we are, but the ones that we have, we're well connected with. And if there's an emergency, if there's a sound in the area that's like, wow, what was that?
Mm-hmm.
That's not normal. We'll be really quick to all call each other and be like, is everything okay? Are you all right? Do you need a hand? And just make sure that we're checking in with each other, because, you just never know when somebody might need help. There might be an emergency, or, maybe they don't know to ask for help. Maybe they're not comfortable asking for help. But on the other hand, sometime you might need help. Maybe you realize that, wow, I'm short of this thing that I thought I had, and I
Mm-hmm.
use some, or I need a hand with something. And having that relationship built it's just priceless, really. Having that ability to contact somebody who is local to you and right there next to you is just a really valuable thing. So it's one of those things that I would really encourage people. If you don't know your neighbors, if you don't have a list of neighbors' phone numbers or contact information, I would just start going around and knocking on doors and, talking to people and say, hey, I'm just putting together a list of all the neighbors' numbers that we can share amongst each other in case of emergencies, and get to know people and start, have a barbecue this
I was
summer.
going to say, have a block party. That's what we did when we moved in. We just had, and it was a driveway party. We live in a cul-de-sac, so it was a driveway party, and we passed around a sheet,
Yep.
and then I typed it up and emailed it out to everybody. That way, it wasn't like in case of disaster. It was like, hey, we just want to get to know you, but it serves the same purpose that if something bad, like when there was a power outage, then we could text, is everyone out of power in the neighborhood? Oh yeah, we're all out. So okay, well,
Yeah.
if anyone needs anything, we've got lots of firewood, or we've got this or that. And so yeah, it just gives you a sense of camaraderie, and like you're not alone. And that's a good feeling too, to know that you've got people around you that are looking out for you. And yep, that is a good sense.
Oh, I think that's a wonderful thing, especially in our modern world. We all feel a little disconnected, and to have that is just it's very helpful, on so many different levels. So I think one of the things that I hear both you and me saying over and over again is, don't wait until an emergency happens before you start thinking about these things. Think
Right.
about them now, make your plans now. Choose a spot in your house where you can stash a few things for emergencies. Make sure you put it on your calendar to be checking that stash every so often. Make sure battery backups are charged and your food is fresh, and that you've got all the different things that you need in an easy to locate location, easy to access location. And, put a little bit of time into thinking about it. It's only going to increase your peace of mind.
You could even, depending on the age of the children, if they're teenagers, have a pretend power outage.
Mm.
Warn them ahead of time. Okay, it's 8 o'clock. The lights are going off. What do we do? All right, Billy, you get the lamp. Nancy, you start the fire with Dad, and just see how. And then if somebody gets upset or if it's a problem. All right, let's turn the lights on. Let's go through this again. And a dry run, no different than any kind of dry run. If the house is on fire, okay, who goes where? What do we
Right.
do? Practice makes perfect. And you're right. No matter how often we think, okay, this is what I'll do in an emergency, it's an emergency. That's why it's called an emergency. Something has gone wrong. And the more prepared you can be, the more peace of mind.
I love that idea of doing those dry runs. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's so valuable. Not only do you see your holes, but you actually have the ability to frame the situation,
Mm-hmm.
not only for your kids, but also for yourself. If you plan a power outage or an emergency, a test run there, you can really frame that in, yay, we're going to have fun. We're going to get to do something different. Our normal routine is going to go out the window a little bit, and we're going to, pretend like we're a little house on the prairie.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever it is that you do, you have this ability to shape the narrative for people around you and to kind of train them in that way of thinking. When the power goes out in my house, my kids cheer. And I'm not joking. They absolutely cheer. They're like, yeah, this is going to be fun. We're going to do something fun. It's going to be different. It's not going to be our normal thing. And it's because it's happened for us so many times that they kind of know the drill, and they know that we're going to do something kind of fun to make up for the extra challenge that comes with, hauling extra firewood or doing all the extra things that you end up having to do a little bit more manually than maybe you do every day.
Yeah.
And, so you just have this great opportunity to just
Mm-hmm.
test it out and make it a fun thing.
Yeah, that's why I suggested maybe having a few simple games that you don't normally get out. Maybe
Yeah.
the dominoes that they haven't played with for a few years, or something that maybe a pack of Uno cards, or something, a marble. Maybe I don't remember how to play marbles and jacks, but something like that they haven't done for a while, just to make it just not something terrifying, but something cozy, an adventure. Think of it that way. It's an
There we go.
adventure. Yeah, like you
I
said,
love it.
Little House on the Prairie night. I think one time when the power went out when the kids were little, we even had them call us Ma and Pa instead of Mom and Dad. Really get into the spirit of things.
Throw a couple aprons on,
Yeah.
and make it fun. Make it something that's really enjoyable. So, Glenda, thank you so much for all your thoughts. It's been really great getting to visit with you. And you guys, if you have not checked out Layman's, you really, really need to. Glenda, what's the best way for them to come find you?
Okay, laymans.com is the website. If you ever make it to the store, we have a really large store. It's about 40,000 square feet. It's like going to a museum and shopping. My father was a huge restorer, lovingly restored antiques. I'm talking potbelly stoves, tractors, sleighs. We have a goat-powered treadmill. He collected wringer washers. So you got to go through the store twice, once looking up and once looking at eye level. We get people from all over the country. We've been tracking zip codes, and there's people from 30, 40 states every week. I humbly say it is a real destination. There's no place like it. And we're right at the edge of Amish country. So if you've ever wanted to see Amish country, the beautiful rolling hills, the buggies, the windmills, it's just so peaceful and beautiful, particularly in the summer and the fall. We are about an hour south of Cleveland. The tiny town is called Kidron. And then we have our catalog. It's 156 pages of simple products, and it's for sale for $6 on our website. And we sell lots of them, even though most of the products in the catalog are available for sale on the website. People still like the tactile feel of the catalog. So we've got the website and the catalog and the retail store, just the one store. But I've really enjoyed talking with you, and we follow you on all your channels, love your emails and everything. I actually bought your gluten-free sourdough bread baking book for my son's girlfriend and gave it to her for
Ooh.
Christmas. So,
Oh, yay. That's wonderful. Well, thank you very much for that. Let's spell Layman's just for people who are
sure.
listening.
Lehmans. And that was, of course, that's my maiden name. And that was my father, Jay Layman's last name. So
That's great. That is so wonderful. And of course, we'll have a link for you over in the show notes. And Glenda, I think Josh and I need to plan a trip out there. I think
I
it's
would love that.
That would be a lot of fun. I would
just go across the country, just do a road trip. And there's a lot of other places around here that I think you would find interesting too. So I could definitely make it worth your while, but I think you would love it.
Oh, that sounds like fun. All right. Well, thank you so much. And we'll see you guys again soon.
Okay. Thank you.